Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today we're going to be talking about the perks on my traps, exactly what I use, why I use them, and I'm going to list them out from the most important to the least important, right? And as you can see over here, I have a reference sheet, which is really nice. You can just go ahead, click the link in the description, right? And in fact, all my videos from now will have a link to this reference sheet, right? This will be a useful reference sheet for those that are still trying to wonder exactly what kind of perks you should use on your traps, right? And the reds over here are going to be the 100% required for the AFK builds, right? Orange is going to be the highly recommended, right? Not necessarily 100% required, but it's highly recommended you have them. And then there's going to be the green ones, which are kind of like really nice additions if you have additional perk up or additional schematic XP, additional evil mats, right? And you just go ahead and level them up, right? It's a little nice addition to have because I do have some little niches where it's nice to just have them in there, right? And of course, none of this would be possible without the help of the community, my Discord server, ASC, and friends, right? I'm not really necessarily the most perfect individual in the world, but I do make mistakes like I did in my wall dart reference sheet. I was like, made a little mistake there. But yeah, I corrected a mistake. Someone pointed out, hey, that's not right. And I'm like, I tested it out. Hey, you're right. That ain't right. So there were some changes I did to the wall dart reference sheet because I had a previous one that wasn't right, so I had to change it. I do a lot of retesting, and there we go, I finally got it. So yeah, so I do make mistakes here and there, but it's really nice when people, you know, come out and speak up. You're like, yo, you're wrong, and I'm like, yo, hey, you're right, I'm not wrong. So yeah, so yeah, if you ever notice any mistakes in my videos or anything like that, you go ahead and feel free to point them out, right? I don't really mind at all. Now, I did make some changes to my previous version, which I released a couple days ago, and those couple of changes are just changing two traps, right? I added the anti-airs because I completely forgot about them for some reason, which I recommend, but I don't have it required. And I also added the damage wooden floor spike, right? Because the damage wooden floor spike in many cases can be very useful, right? They do add up to a little bit of extra damage, but not a significant amount where it's going to be mind-blowing or anything like that. But yeah, all right. Now, the first trap we're going to talk about is the wall launcher, and I'm going to require two wall launchers for my Twine endurance build. And the first one is going to be zero impact and double reloader on the right. It is very essential to have zero impact because not only can save structure from preventing the husk from launching too far, right? It's going to save you a lot on the durability because it has very high durability, right? So the high durability, very important for the AFK builds, so you don't have to replace the traps, right? And the low impact is not really that important because, like I said in my previous wall launcher video, if you haven't watched it, go ahead and watch it because there's a lot of really nice information in that wall launcher video which most people don't know about, and it's really critical for many builds that I use, right? So zero impact, not a problem because husk hitbox overlapping, and the impact values are going to multiply, and those go into like ginormous numbers to the point where there's no point of really having impact, right? So it's just going to break their impact guards of everything. You don't need impact, right? Knockback, not really that important either. Why is knockback not really that important in many cases? Well, because most of my builds are going to be on the edge of tiles, right? If most of my builds are going to be on the edge of tiles, then I don't really need to have a tremendous amount of knockback, right? I just need to have just enough so they'll push them off the edge, they'll get recycled or whatever, right? So that's why I don't really need high knockback either in most cases, right? So this is really fits well with what we're trying to achieve in Twine endurance, right? With recycling smashers in particular, right? And then the other wall launcher I highly recommend, right, highly required, is a triple impact double reloader wall launcher with the last perk being durability. And it's really critical that we have this, and the reason being is because the zero impact is actually not enough for the smashers. It'll be enough for everything else, but it's not going to be enough for the smashers in most cases unless unless you're going to have hitbox overlapping. Hitbox overlapping really reliable in the very beginning of the tunnels because there's so much density, right? However, once you go towards the end of the tunnels, there's not going to be much density anymore. It's just going to be smashers. So that's where we really need those bigger knockback values to come and play and really knock that smasher out. And of course, knockback as well, as a consequence of having the impact rolls, you're going to have knockback, which is going to launch us further away, which could be good and could be bad in cases, right? So far for my builds, it's been fine, right? I think maybe lava, I need to think about it a little bit, but most of the time it's been fine, right? Most of the time it's been fine. Okay, so those are the most important wall launchers to have. You need to have these two wall launchers. If you do not have these two wall launchers, you're not going to be able to build for the Twine Endurance for a full AFK wave 1 to 24. Which, by the way, disclaimer, I am working on a wave 25 AFK build, but impractical to build, but it is possible, right? It is possible, but that's something I'll need to work on for a while there. But anyway, so there's also another really important reason why we're using double reloaders on these wall launchers. I already talked about the durability, I talked about the impact values, the knockback values, but why am I using 2 times reload here, right? I need to use 2 times reload here, and I need to have them, and there's a good reason why. And this has to do with the floor launchers. Now, the rolls on the floor launchers are going to be literally identical to the wall launchers that are required for my builds. The only difference is one perk. We replace the reload with increased impact and knockback, right? And this is very critical, right? And there's actually a good reason why we're replacing one reload with the increased impact and knockback, right? So first of all, we're going to have really high durability floor launchers, right? And because again, we have the same mentality of just pushing husks off the tile so that they're no longer on the tile and they'll go back to recycler, because they're going to do the exact same purpose as if they're going to have a high impact or high knockback floor launcher, right? So durability, important. That's good. Right? And then another thing to note is that floor launchers actually have been nerfed in the 11.3 patch, right? Not only in terms of the smashers, they no longer work on smashers, right? But they also have been nerfed in terms of the how far they've been throwing husks, right? So they've been nerfed just a little bit, right? And because of that nerf, right, in order to make up to what it was previously, we need to have another impact roll, right? So it's really critical that we have another impact roll for your floor launchers, right, to make up for that. So that actually has a similar launch distances to the wall launchers when you have a one tile slant, when you have a slant that's one tile high. All right. So with that in mind, we are pretty much balanced with the floor launcher, wall launcher, knockback, right, in terms of the knockback. But there's also another very, very critical importance by changing that one perk from reload into impact and knockback, and that other reason is to have different reload timers on your wall launchers, right? So the wall launchers are double reloaders over there, right? So when they're paired up with a floor launcher, right, and then it becomes a single reload, so they have different reload timers, right? With a reload in game, it says 4.3 and 5.6 respectively. However, the real values is going to be 5.6 and 6.9 seconds, right? So those are the real values when you factor in the delay, right? The delay of activation, right? It's a 1 second delay. And there's also a 0.3 second of the perk of the trap for the duration of the trap, right? Because it activates, there's a 0.3 second of it going forward and going backwards, right? And that 0.3 second is not counting as part of the reload for some reason. So there's a 0.3 second added for every floor launcher and every wall launcher. All right. Now, with that in mind, right, we actually have the perfect floor launcher and wall launcher combination, basically, right? So those are the two most important floor launchers and the two most important wall launchers, all right? So once you have those set, then you're pretty much good to go for majority of crowd control, right? The majority of crowd control, okay? Now, there's going to be two more wall launchers I'm going to highly recommend to you, right? And these wall launchers are not 100% required for the build, right? If you don't have the extra schematic or whatever, then fine, you can just do the two that I just say required. But these two I would highly recommend if you have additional wall launcher schematics and additional resources to put in wall launchers, right? And the reason why I recommend these is more or less for stability reasons, right? And the first one is going to be 5 times durability, single reload, right? This is actually going to serve a similar purpose to the double reloader, 4 times durability, right? Where it's going to have a very high durability wall launcher, right? And it's just going to push husks off the edge. The only reason why I recommend this particular version, right, is that in many cases I don't really need a wall launcher and floor launcher together to offset, right? So instead I can just rely on a single reload, and that'll be good enough, right? That'll be good enough. I can add more durability. It will slow down the launching just a little bit, where it makes the trap last a very long time, which I think I calculated to about 14 minutes of constant activation, right? Which is really, really amazing, like between 14 and 15 minutes, right? Now, the wall launcher, the other wall launcher I highly recommend, right, is going to be the double reloader triple impact healing wall launcher, right? And this is more or less trying to get husks away from the wall launcher that kind of beat on it for no real reason, right? Like, other than just being assassin husks and just trying to be a little bit just being a little bit stupid, if you can say, right? So sometimes the assassin has to be a little bit stupid and just trying to hit on walls, right? And you may notice this in certain particular areas when you're trying to build a Twine endurance, like, hey, why is that assassin has be on that wall? It don't make sense, like, just being on that wall, right? So these particular cases, right, you can either leave it alone and just let it beat on the wall, or you can use a healing wall launcher, right? Heal up the wall and then just launch them out, and then it'll reset their pathing and they're pretty much back to normal, right? So it's just for those particular cases, right? Or there's some other cases too where I use it on a particular assassin husk block off, right? There's a block off for assassin husk, which I do use on the Wamp amplifier, and that particular wall does need some healing on it because it does take damage, right? And the best option for me, in my opinion, would be the healing wall launcher, right? Healing spike is actually not good enough because some husks like laser boys are just way too tanky. You don't want them to hit on it constantly like that. So instead, just use a healing wall launcher. Right, so these two wall launchers I would highly recommend, right? Not required, but if you do have them, it'll increase the stability of the build, right? Again, when it comes to AFK endurance, right? In AFK endurance, it all comes down to stability, consistency, right? If your builds are consistent, they're stable, then you're gonna have a higher chance of success when it comes to AFKing all the 24 waves, right? So this is why I really recommend these so many variety of traps, right? And 4 wall launchers is what I recommend, but only two of them are 100% required, right? Now, I'm going to talk about one more additional floor launcher that's going to be highly recommended for my build, but it is not required, right? It is something that I recommend, and this is going to be 2x impact, single reload, 3x durability floor launcher, right? And this is actually particularly for heights with slants that are 2 tiles high, right? So slants that are 2 tiles high, and those ones in particular, I do want to make sure that I have one extra impact to get them off the tile, right? And also it's nice to have in general because of the extra durability, right? So I don't have to rely on the 4x impact floor launcher, right? So the 4x impact floor launcher, right, it doesn't have much durability associated with it, right? So I need to have a little bit extra durability for certain spots, right? And those particular spots are going to be the lava, right, which gets attacked 3 times, so it's going to get lots of durability usage, right? And it's going to be the pit amplifier, right? So those 2 particular spots over there, I do want higher durability, but I do need to have extra impact because of how those spots I set up, right? So, but again, this is, I wouldn't say 100% required, but it's highly recommended to have this, right? If you don't have it, it's not going to like break your builds or anything like that, or it's not going to make it really unstable, but it's really nice to have that little bit extra durability because it does get attacked 3 times, right? So it's quite a bit. Okay, now I'm going to skip over the green traps for now. I'm just going to focus on the red and the orange traps, right? The green traps are nice little additions that you can also look at for my reference sheet in the description, right? Just click on the link, you have the reference sheet, right? And these are nice little additions to have. So this particular wooden floor spike over here is going to be required 100%, right? You're going to need to have a level 25 wooden floor spike, right? With no physical leveled up and pure durability and healing, Right, and the durability is going to be important for when you have the amp attacked like 5 times, right? We're going to get attacked 5 times. It's extending a little bit, it's extending beyond the 15 minutes, or to the point where you're going to need to replace traps. And the last thing you want to do is to replace the wooden floor spike, right? Because the wooden floor spike goes out, pretty much your trap tunnel is going to be like really bad, right? Because you need that slow. You really do need that slow. All right. The healing for the wooden floor spike is actually something I've been using not only just for like little spots here and there, but it's actually used on certain block offs that I've been doing, right? And I can show that another time. But this particular video, I'm going to just focus on the traps themselves and how it's related to the builds, all right? So wooden floor spike, 100% required. You're going to need that slow at the beginning of the tunnel, right? And then towards the end, right? Towards the end of the tunnel, right? We're going to be required to use tar pits, right? Or floor launchers, right? And tar pits are very, very critical for much of my builds because they stop the husks. We want these husks to stop, and then it buys a lot of time. So in a sense, tar pit is kind of like, how do I say this? It's kind of like a super wooden floor spike in a sense, right? Where it just stop the husks, and then you can buy a lot of time for your wall launchers to do its job and just launch them, right? Or push them off the tile. So the perks you're going to need to have is all durability, as much durability as you can get, right? Because every single husk that goes on it, it'll tick down the durability by 1. It'll tick it down even more once you shoot it, right? Which is something that you should keep in mind. So never shoot your tar pits, right? And the first roll on it's going to be a fire, right? But you don't really need to level it up. So the first perk on it, you can just leave it completely unleveled and you are fine, right? And tar pits are 100% required for my builds. You need a tar pit, right? You need it 100%, right? I use it in pretty much every build, I think, right? I think every single amplifier I have, I use a tar pit somewhere. Except maybe Valley and my cheesy build, but I think that's about it. Now, the next trap I'm going to really highly recommend to get, in fact, it's necessary to get, is going to be the ceiling gas trap, right? And the ceiling gas trap is going to do a pretty decent amount of AoE damage over a period of time, right? And this particular gas trap, I'm going to put healing on it in the last perk, right? And healing is going to help certain block offs, right? Such as the Ridge amplifier. It's going to help out for the Wamp amplifier, right? And it's going to help for those particular block offs, because sometimes it's completely unavoidable to have husks beating on those block offs, and there's no way you can stop it, right? So the only way you can do that is by using the healing gas trap. Now, they don't do enough damage to the point where they'll break it, right? Because if it's a laser boy breaking it, then there's something wrong, right? There's something definitely wrong. If it's just like a little lobber hitting on it in terms of melee, then that's okay, right? Because they don't do enough damage to really become a threat, and they only do it for a little bit of a time, right? So this is where the healing gas trap comes into play, right? Now, the other gas trap I highly recommend to get, right, because it's really underrated how good this is. It is the double crit rating, double crit damage effecturation gas trap, right? And this is what I use for the Wamp amplifier, where the assassin husks are going to be trying to beat on that wall, right? For the lower area, right? Because I try to lower them in the little block off. So that assassin block off, I'm going to use that gas trap for it. But if you don't have that particular gas trap, you only have one gas trap, then you just use the healing one. That's okay, right? That's okay. Okay, but I highly recommend to get this particular version of the effecturation. And because of my recent testing, I found out the effecturation is actually lasting twice as long as it should be. Or at least that's what it seems like, right? So the effecturation, right? And normally a gas trap ticks 5 times, right? So it hits 5 times. However, when you add effecturation, it hits 8 times, right? And which is 60% more instead of 30% more, right? So kind of interesting about that. It's doing 60% more total damage, right? But that, so it's a total of 8 ticks, and those particular 8 times that it hits, it's over a period of 7 seconds. So I don't really need reload on a ceiling gas trap at all, which has a reload of 8 with a true reload of 9 seconds, right? So 2 seconds downtime, which is still fine, right? Still really good. But yeah, if you're gonna have only one gas trap and you can only afford one gas trap, it would be the healing one. So just go for the healing one and you should be good to go, right? The extra damage associated with the other one, it's just nice to really have that little extra damage, right? It's really nice to have. Now, the next trap I'm going to highly suggest you get, right, and you're going to need it, in my opinion, for my builds, is going to be the wall dynamo, right? And the wall dynamo is going to be used in 2 spots, right? Well, technically there's some other ones too, right? Yeah, I guess there's some other ones too, but mainly it's going to be for husk phasing, right? So if a husk phase through your builds, right, is going to be used for those spots, right? So you're going to need wall dynamo for husk phasing, right? If there's some spots in there, put a dynamo in there, zap them, right, with really high damage, and you are golden, right? So that's pretty much the main purpose of the wall dynamo, is to zap those husks, right? That phase. Now the other purpose as well is going to be the Wamp amplifier for my assassin husk block off, right? So there's an assassin husk block off that I need to use the wall dynamos for, right? And I can't use broadsides because they're not really that effective when it comes to the regular husks, right? When it comes to regular husks, the broadsides simply don't do really well, and especially the healing husk, right? So that's why the dynamo is going to be really good for that, and the wall dart, which is going to be also a next 2. All right. So there's something really interesting about this particular wall dynamo, is that there is no reload on it, and there's a good reason why there's no reload on it, right? Some people might think, oh, you're not using reload on it, are you silly? I'm like, nah, this is actually really well thought out why I don't use any reload, and I don't use it for a particular good reason. First of all, I'm placing the reload with extra crit damage, right? So the extra crit damage on average is going to add about 30% more damage, right? So it adds 30% more damage on average, right? At the cost of 42% reload, right? So that 42% reload netting with the 0.8 second activation delay, right? It's going to be activating at most 39% faster, right? So if you factor in reload, right, it's going to activate 39% faster compared to the wall dynamo, right? Which is 39% faster versus 30% more damage, right? So it seems like the clear winner would be 30% faster, right? Yes, if it's at the front of the tunnel, right? So if your dynamo's at the very front of the tunnel and it's being constantly activated with no breaks, then yes, 100% you would go for the reload. It would activate faster, right? And you're good, right? However, as soon as you start approaching towards the back of the tunnels, these traps are getting less and less usage. They're getting less and less frequency, right? So because of that difference with the frequency, right, and the damage, right, the damage is going to really start outshining when it comes towards the back of the tunnels, right? When it comes to the back of the tunnels, then it's really going to start shining, and that's where you really want to use those wall dynamos for, right? With no reload, it is big zapper, right? Big zapper. However, reload itself does have a really important place, right? Still, so that's why it's still, you can see it's green, right? Because it's still a nice addition to have when you're at the front of tunnels, right? But in general, I would just go for the one with no reload. If you're just building in general, right? I would go for the one with no reload. Big, huge damage numbers, kaboom, right? That's what I would do. Okay, so that is the wall dynamos. All right. One thing that is very critical about this as well is going to be the healing perk, and the healing perk is going to be important for the Wamp amplifier, right? I do need healing on the wall because it does take damage over time. For whenever Wamp gets attacked, it's going to take damage on that wall, but they're never going to break it as long as you do enough damage in that kill box. All right, and as well, durability you don't really need on a wall dynamo because it really lasts a long time naturally, right? Especially when I don't have any reload. If I don't have any reload, it pretty much will last forever, right? It'll never run out. Now, the last trap that's going to be required for my Twine endurance is going to be the wall darts, right? And the wall darts are going to be very important, in my opinion, for the Wamp amplifier. And this is pretty much the only place I'm going to use it for, is for the Wamp amplifier. However, I think it's important enough to the point where it's required because of the amount of damage that it does for the laser boys, right? The laser boys have a really fat hitbox and the darts hit them a lot, and I really need those darts to kill those laser boys because if they're being on the wall too much, it's going to do too much damage and might risk breaking it. So I really do want to make sure that those laser boys are dead. All right. Now, Another thing to note about this particular trap is that I have no reload associated with this trap at all. And in fact, I have no other recommendation for traps in general, right? Because this particular trap is probably the best perk trap to use, right? This is probably the best perk trap to use. And there's a good reason why. So first of all, you can see it's double crit ring, double crit damage, so it's going to do really heavy crits, right? 44% increased damage. It's already physical, so it has lots of natural damage already associated with it, right? Which is really, really good. Now, the reload itself, right? The reload itself is actually going to be naturally about 6 seconds, right? With plus 0.8, so it's going to be 6.8 seconds, right? So the reload's actually not that bad if you think about it, right? If you add reload to it, right? So if you do the regular damage, crit rating, crit damage, reload, right? If you do those kind of perks, then you're gonna have the variety pack, but it's actually not gonna do that much faster than you think, right? I think it's calculated to be about 35% faster, including the 0.8 second activation delay, right? 35% faster versus 33% more damage on the supercharged traps. 33% damage versus 35% faster. In the best case scenario, yeah, you might get 102% more DPS, but that's the best case scenario. Think about it logically, you're never going to have the best case scenario. You're going to have all kinds of situations where you're going to have a trap that doesn't really get used that much, or a trap that gets used extremely frequently. And when you account for all these different situations, you might as well better off to use the highest damage possible trap in this particular case, right? And this is going to be 100%, in my opinion, the best perk trap to use for wall darts. Whether you're doing my base, or whether you're doing someone else's base, or whether you're doing a regular trap tunnel, this in my opinion is going to be the best perk trap to use, right? You do not need reload, right? You do not need reload on this wall dart. And another thing to note as well for wall darts is that they can hit multiple times on the same husk, which I thought was incorrect, and I did some testing and retesting, and I'm like, oh, well, it looks like they can actually hit multiple times. Oh, cool, right? So they hit multiple times, and for my testing, it averages generally between 2 to 3 times on a regular husk or husky husk, right? Depending on the positioning, and the 3.5 to 4.5 for the smashers, right? And this is kind of like an average depending on if they're in the middle or if they're on the edge, right? Because the damage range itself for the wall darts is only half a tile, right? It's in the middle of the tile, whereas the activation is going to be 3/4 of the tile, right? So all this information I've been researching, and it's also in my reference sheet, right? So yeah, there's a lot of really good things about the wall darts, right? So I really highly recommend to get them, right? They are just absolutely an amazing trap right now. The only downside I can really think about the wall darts is that they have no penetration, right? So if there's a fat husk in front of the wall dart, it won't hit the husk behind it, right? So there's no penetration associated with it, which is okay. I mean, you don't always need to have penetration to be happy, right? Alright, so that should be the wall darts. Now, I think I made a mistake and I actually forgot one trap that is 100% required for my builds, and that is actually going to be the wall lights. Now, the wall light over here, you're only going to be required one wall light, which is going to be double reload, 4 times durability. You do not need the other wall light per se, but it's really highly recommended to get the other one, which is 4 times impact. Alright, and the reason why I recommend this wall light is going to help with a lot of crowd control, right? And it's also going to help with staggering the smashers down for more recycling. Alright, so this is what this wall light's for, and there's certain areas on ramps which is going to be a really nice addition for, because the wall launchers don't work on ramps, but the wall lights do. Wall lights also have a really high impact, right? They instantly stagger any smasher up to power level 140, right? With no impact perks. So that's really good, right? But because the Twine Endurance has higher levels, they don't do that anymore. But however, it's still really good. And I think it's pretty much on par with the 5 times impact wall launcher, right? In terms of the impact amount, right? So that's like really amazing. But the endurance levels, they go up to power level 243, and I think it's 211 for solo, Right? So 211 for solo is actually going to be low enough to the point where you only need 4 times impact on the wall light to instantly stagger the smasher, right? So that actually is going to be a very useful tool in certain situations in my builds, right, which I started to adapt, right? And one prime example of this build, right, is going to be, for example, the lava amplifier, right, which I do have a certain spot that sometimes the smasher do hit on, but because I'm staggering the smasher away, right, in the opposite direction, and then they change their pathing. So it's like, oh, amazing, right? So there's just certain things here and there that are really nice to have, right? We'll instantly stagger a smasher, and it will help change their direction. Right? It'll help change their direction. So whether or not you don't have enough block off, right? Like literally just like maybe you need a 1 extra block off, right? But you just don't have it, and then just stagger it, boom. Oh, they're gonna change their mind. Nice, right? So those kind of situations are really good. And I also started to use it on some other builds too, which I can also show too. For example, the pit amplifier, the last wall launcher, since it always gets destroyed by the tornado, I actually replaced it with the wall light, 4 times impact, right? So instantly stagger to smash it out. And of course, I replaced it with the, instead of a tar pit, I'm going to replace it with the floor launcher, because a floor launcher will never get destroyed by a tornado. And it's the only floor trap in the game which cannot be destroyed by a tornado, which is awesome. Floor launchers are great. Now those are all the required traps you're going to need for my Twine endurance build, right? But there's also going to be some other ones that are going to be really nice to have, especially when I did my new build, which is going to be the damage build, right? So the damage build is something I've been kind of a fan of, right? I'm still trying to improve it here and there, but yeah. So I'm also going to go over some other traps too, which I would highly recommend for you to get. All right. Now the next trap I highly recommend to get is going to be the sound wall. I highly recommend to get this, right? It's going to be important in my opinion for the Devil North, it's going to be important for the ridge, and it's going to be important for the bridge. Not necessarily to the point where your build's not going to work anymore, but it's just really highly recommended to get this sound wall, right? And the reason being is to disable the propanes, right? So the bridge and ridge amplifier have lava spurring out, and this does unavoidable damage for the propanes. There's no way, really good way to work around it. So the best thing that we can do, in my opinion, is to just simply disable the propanes, right? You can disable the propanes and you should be fine. For the bridge, you absolutely can't do anything about it. Even if you had a really awesome lava bomb shift, they just spawn right on the lava spurring out, so you really can't do anything about that. So the sound wall is going to help just in case, just a little bit. So I do start replacing some sound walls in the front of my tunnels, which is, I guess, a little nice addition to do. All right. So yeah, that is something really important in my opinion that I do, which I highly recommend for other people to start practicing as well. Alright, so having those sound walls. And I do also, on the side over there, you can see I have an additional sound wall that is nice to have, which is a single reload one. Because some damage tunnels, what you end up doing is that you have 2 sound walls that have different reloads, right? And this is even increasing the chances of success when it comes to the sound walls, right? As well, to keep a note that there is no effect duration on these sound walls. I used to use it, and testing it, it's kind of useless. Yeah, you really don't need it. You primarily need sound walls to just disable the propanes, right? If you want the sound walls to increase the amount of crowd control you have, then you could use effect duration, but it's not needed because we have tons of other traps for crowd control anyway, right? You only need the sound walls for unique ability of disabling propanes. If you need more crowd control, use a freeze trap, use a wall light, use a floor launcher, use a wall launcher, right? There's all kinds of other options. You don't need the sound wall for the crowd control, right? You just need it to disable the propanes. All right. So with that in mind, just go for the extra durability on the 6th perk. Now, optionally, you can also go for healing, right? So healing is also another good option if you're doing pure damage builds, right? For my particular damage build, I'm only using on the valley, so I have the mega base on it, and that also acts as healing as well. Now the next trap I would highly recommend to get would be the wall spikes, right? And these particular wall spikes are going to have a special functionality for healing, right? And I already have a recommendation or pretty much a requirement for healing when it comes to the wall dynamos. The wall dynamo has a healing, which is nice. Now there's also a healing wall launcher, which I already highly recommended too, which is also nice. However, this wall spike has a special healing on the wall, which I can't use either trap, right? So sometimes there are situations where the wall dynamo won't work, right? Because of how the how I'm structuring the block off, right? Or how I'm structuring the particular tiles, right? The dynamo won't actually be able to register hus. Right, and then there's other situations where I can't use a wall launcher either because it's not going to really solve the problem. It won't launch them anywhere, right? So the next best option would be the wall spike, which would heal the wall, and also it will prevent the husk from being on it continuously because they'll just eventually die to it, right? So so this is really what's really nice about this wall spike, is for those particular situations, it's always going to be a phaser. It's always going to be something phasing through the freaking wall. And you can't do anything about it other than just, well, just put that wall spike on there, let them kill themselves, right? And there's pretty much, I think, only one spot I do it on, which is the pit amplifier. And I think that's the only one I can think of, right? I'd recommend to get it still, but it's not required for my builds. I might even change it to a green because I think I only use it on one spot and that's it. The next trap I highly recommend to get is actually something that I use for my damage builds, right? And this is going to be the ceiling electric field, right? So ceiling electric fields are actually really amazing floor, ceiling trap, right? Not only for if you're doing endurance, but just regular missions in general, right? Because they hit a really big radius, even though the trigger range is a little bit smaller, but it's still bigger than one by one tile, right? And they also hit from 2 tiles above, which is even more useful, right? And I did a lot of research on this with my testing, and it's really, it's a really good trap to have. However, for my Twine Endurance, I only use it for my damage build, right? So if you're going to use in a damage build, you can go ahead and use these perks, right? And these perks, again, they don't have any reload, right? Because when I do the comparison of reload versus the comparison of damage, right? The reload does really do actually more than the wall darts. Wall darts, the reload don't really make that much of a difference, but the ceiling electric field actually does make a little bit of a difference, but it's not worth it in my opinion. It's still not worth it in my opinion, and I would still not go for any reload on your ceiling electric fields. And the reason being, the 6-second reload already pretty good, right? So you don't really need it. And when you do the calculations with that associated with the activation timer, it's it's very marginal that the best case scenario for the best case scenario, right? Because the best case scenario, again, is constantly activating that trap over and over again with no breaks, right? But in reality, that's not always going to happen, right? And especially when you start going towards the back of the tunnels, right? Those ceiling electric fields are really going to start to shine once you get that extra crit damage, right? So that's why I really recommend these rolls with no reloads on them, right? For these particular traps. As well, another thing to keep in mind as when you're thinking about no reload on these traps, they're going to last a very long time, which is also going to be very important when it comes to damage builds and the endurance, right? You need traps that last a long time to ensure they're not going to run out, right? And that's why I think it's really important. The next trap we're going to be talking about, which I highly recommend to get, is going to be the broadsides. And this is not associated with necessarily all my builds, but just necessarily associated with the damage builds, right? So when you're doing the damage build, the broadsides is really nice to have for the smasher units, right? And this is the trap that I would call a smasher killer, not necessarily for the other husks. It doesn't actually do nearly as much damage as compared to wall darts with the dynamos when it comes to other husks. That combination is always going to outdo the broadsides when it comes to other husks. However, the broadsides for these smashers are pretty much right on par with that. They might be even a little bit better. I have to do testing on it more. But overall, the broadsides are just really freaking amazing when it comes to killing the smashers, right? So that's why I would highly recommend to get broadsides. And as well, it is cheaper to do broadsides than to do wall dynamo with the ceiling electric field, with the wall dart, all that together, right? It would be cheaper just to do the broadside, right? And yeah, they're also really good not only in like a 1x1 box, but they're also good in even a 2x1 box. They do really amazing damage when it comes to the bouncing balls, right? Or I even tested the 3x1. It's also still not that bad too versus a smasher, right? But again, the broadside is mainly going to be used as a smasher killer, right? For other husks, is not going to be nearly as effective, right? However, it does have one nice, I guess, side benefit too, is that it does have penetration, right? Unlike the wall darts, right? So the wall darts don't have penetration, but they hit multiple times, right? Whereas the broadsides to have penetration, they're going to hit everything, right? So I guess that's one thing that you can keep in note as well. Now, as you can see, the one I recommend is actually the one without reload, right? Now, you can use a reload broadside, that's perfectly fine too, but when it comes to full optimization with supercharged traps, right, I recommend to use the one without reload, right? Going for pure crit rating, pure crit damage. And that, in my opinion, is going to be really, really important, because generally speaking, these are going to be used as smasher killers, right? So I'd use the broadsides more towards the back of the tunnels, right? Where the smashers are going to still be alive, right? And because they're back of the tunnels, they're not going to be used as frequently. So I want to do as much damage as I can for that, right? And I'm not generally using broadsides at the front. Now, if you do use broadsides at the front, then you can probably go ahead and use the reload ones, right? Or you can still use these ones too, which are also perfectly fine too. Right, the damage difference in there, right, there's going to be like there's going to be doing a lot more damage with the crit versions versus the reload versions, right? But the reload versions activate faster, right, which may be really nice because this does have a slow reload, right? But we had to factor in if this trap is going to be used very frequently at the front of the tunnels, then maybe you can use the reload ones, right, for better optimization. But if they're going to be used in the back, then the reload ones are not going to be as effective for the back, because they're not going to do nearly as much damage in total, right? And the back ones, you would do definitely the big crits, right? The big crits. And my final recommendation for a trap to get, right, which is going to be really nice to have for the bridge, is not necessarily a 100% requirement, but it's really nice to have. And that's the anti-air trap. The anti-air trap would help shoot the meteors from going onto your builds, right? And meteors only happen on the bridge amplifier, right? You don't have to use the anti-airs, but it does make a pretty big difference when it comes to keeping your builds alive, right? So yeah, I would recommend to try to go for the anti-airs if you can, right? They're really nice to have. Now they're also nice to have for certain other situations, like for example, lobbers, right? If you're experiencing lobber issues in a certain amplifiers, like on Valley amplifier, if the aggro fails, right, then you can use the anti-airs for that too, right? So there's really nice uses for that. Now the ones I would recommend is the ones primarily focusing on the ones that are not flingers, right? So these ones are going to be pure range, pure reloads, right? Now I assume that you would already have max trap durability, which if you don't, well, yeah, go ahead and get those survivors, right? But yeah, definitely I would recommend full range, full reload on your anti-air traps, alright? Now if you're going to be doing things like killing the husks from the flingers, now I'd definitely use a completely different role for that, right? But I generally don't bother with that. And overall, those are actually pretty much all the traps that I would have required and recommend for my builds, right? And there's the green ones too, which I also use in certain situations, right? But overall, that's actually pretty much all the traps, right? And this is a longer video than I intend to be, which I apologize for. But I think it was really important to try to take my time to explain why I'm using these perks, why I'm choosing these particular traps, right? Because the AFK Twine Endurance is actually a kind of complicated build, right? And there's a lot of different traps I use. I try to help optimize it, try to help stabilize it, right? And there's different really weird techniques I also use too, right? To try to get those assassin husks aggro towards me, right? Using kind of weird cheesy builds, which I'm not a big fan of, but I actually don't have a better solution for, especially for something like Devil North, where yeah, that's just a kind of a mess, which I hope they remove someday, because I really don't like dealing with Devil North. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed it a little bit. If not, if it was a bit too long, then let me know. But yeah, alright, so thank you all for watching, and as always, have fun building.